Hello, Humane marketers. Sarah Nikki Rausch here. Welcome to another episode of the Humane Marketing Podcast, a place to be for the generation of marketers who cares. This is the show where we talk about marketing your business in a way that feels good to you, is aligned with your values, and also resonates more with your conscious customers because it's not pushy, ethical, and also beautiful. So if you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of humane marketing. And if you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. You may want to download your one-page marketing plan with the 7 Ps of humane marketing in the form of a mandala at humane.marketing/one page, the number one and page. So again, humane.marketing/one page. And with that, with no further ado, let's dive into today's conversation.
Hi, Nikki. So good to spend time with you to talk about sales and pricing and putting prices on websites and all that good stuff. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, same here. As I said offline, this question about putting our prices on our website or not, it's whenever I bring this up in the humane marketing circle in our community, for example, it's like, oh, really? Should we? And here's why we shouldn't. And like all these different opinions. So I'm curious to start off our conversation maybe with the prices. And you mentioned, or I think I've seen it on your website, this idea of the customer journey, right? And so take us a little bit into that customer journey and what happens when people come to your website, what stage they're at probably in the customer journey, and what happens when they do see the prices or if they don't see the prices.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I just want to start off by saying that, what I teach is always built on rapport. So I always say relationship first, rapport always. So when somebody is coming to your website, they have indicated interest in some way, right? Like you don't just randomly go to somebody's website and start poking around. So there's something about them that has drawn them here. And that is usually an indication that they're interested in working with you or buying from you or taking that next step with you. And the reason you want to have pricing on your website is because it is helping them establish whether or not they're an ideal client for you. So if somebody comes to your website and they don't see prices, one of the things that they often assume is that your prices are much higher. And in order for them to get that information from you, you're forcing them to take another step, which is to get on a live call with you. And I know that a lot of sales coaches teach, like, don't put pricing on your website because you want the opportunity to have that conversation with people. But that's for your benefit, not for the clients or the prospects. So when you're forcing somebody to do something, what happens in the start of that conversation is they already feel a little bit on the back foot because they're nervous now about having that conversation with you because they have no idea what kind of pricing you're going to come back with. And they might end up feeling embarrassed or ashamed to have to admit to you that they can't afford that. So to me, it's a real breakdown in rapport for the start of the conversation for somebody to be nervous because, what's the pricing? The other thing too, is it kind of sets the stage that not only are you in charge of the conversation, but that you're like, how much do they trust you yet to have that conversation and for you to list pricing? Because how do they know that you're giving them a price and giving somebody else the same price? So there's to me, it shows a lack of trust. It also, I think it's important for you to stand in your credibility and in your authority and charge whatever it is that you charge and be revealing about it. You shouldn't have to hide your pricing in order to try to force people to have conversations with you. You should be attracting your ideal clients, having them look at that and go, I do want to have a conversation with Nikki, or I do want to have a conversation with Sarah, because I'm not sure what is the right offer for me, but I can tell already that she's got something. She's got something for me.
Yeah, I love your approach, and I definitely share the same view. And you mentioned something where other sales coaches might tell people to not put their prices so that, you know, people have to get on a sales conversation with you. And you said that might be in your benefit. I actually don't see it as a benefit, and I'm sure a lot of my listeners won't either, because I feel like we don't want to be in that convincing energy on sales calls anyways,
I
right?
agree. Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
so I actually think it's in our benefit if people have the prices
Mhm.
on the website, so they know exactly what to expect. And you're right, it's so uncomfortable. The unknown and embarrassment comes in. It's just human to feel uncomfortable to talk about money. And so to have that upfront and just kind of like, okay, here's the deal. And also, like you said, it creates this trust of there's not going to be any hidden stuff that I don't know and don't expect. And it's just like, it's all out there. Totally agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, sales, your job is not to convince people to buy from you.
Right.
And if you're approaching sales from this mindset of like, I've got to convince people, well, convincing somebody of something, it does come off a little manipulative, and it does come off a little like icky. And, I think one of the misconceptions about selling is that people think sales is something you do to another person. And kind of taking a page out of your book about that humane approach, you shouldn't have to do anything to another person. I teach that sales is something you do with another person. It's a collaboration.
Right.
And as much as you're deciding whether or not I'm a good fit for you, I'm also deciding whether or not you're a good fit for me, for my business. Can I really serve you and solve the problem or meet the need that you have? And being really candid and honest about that, and not in a way that I don't have to feel bad about myself if you're not a good fit. You don't have to feel bad about yourself if we're not a good fit. We just bless and release and move on. And that's okay.
I feel like it takes the pressure out of this, what I call the gentle sales conversation, right?
Yeah.
In the Selling Like We're Human book, I say, picture yourself in the serene garden where you're just having a cup of tea or coffee with your ideal client. And there the money doesn't even come in, or it comes in very shortly at the end, because it's already dealt with, right? I even send out like a coaching guide where, again, it explains, here's how our collaboration works, here's the price again. And like, they have time to look at this in detail before we ever get on a call. And so then we just have time to be human together and do what you said. It's like, oh, we're figuring out if we're a good fit and if I can truly help you. And it's kind of like this being human and trying to do something to someone, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I totally agree. I love
Right.
that.
Yeah. So in terms of the pricing, it looks like we totally agree. Yet I think sometimes people ask, well, what if I have custom projects? It's like, what if
Mhm.
I don't work hourly, and it's not just like, oh, my hourly rate is this. I create custom projects, so I can put the prices on the website, or can I? Is there another solution you would offer?
Yeah, you actually still can. You could put a range.
Mhm.
Now, and I want to be really clear about this, because a lot of times people think, well, I'll just put a starting at price. And that's a mistake. If you put a starting at price, you just have anchored this low price. And that's not what you want to do. Especially you get on a call with somebody, you find out, how in depth their project is. And that starting at price isn't even close to what the price is that you're going to have to charge them in order to facilitate it. So you can put a range. You could say prices, for this type of project range typically between, and have the low price to the high price. And I don't care if it's $1,000 to $100,000. Just by putting a range, it shows that you're being revealing. Now, you don't want to say something that's not true. So always stand in integrity. And if you know that projects could potentially range between $30,000 and $100,000, put that. And then when they get on the call with you and you say to them, based on what you've shared, the project that we're looking at here is probably in that $70,000 range. Well, they can feel relieved because it's not the high end. They're like, whew, at least it's not 100,000. But if you say 30,000 to, just starting at 30,000, and then you say 70,000 to them, they're going to be upset. They're going to feel like, oh, wow, you're gouging me. No, I'm giving you a legitimate price. And I have been candid about this is the range.
Right. Yeah. So is that similar to the idea of anchoring?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you wouldn't just put the high price here, because that is a way to anchor the high price, but you wouldn't want to do that because that would probably scare off the people that would fall in the smaller, pricing. So put a range on the website. Now, when you talk about your offer or you talk about the ways that you could solve the problem for them in a conversation, I do believe in doing top-down selling. So that is anchoring the higher price first and then work your way down from there. And again, you always want to stand in your place of integrity. Don't recommend $100,000 project if that is so outside of scope of what's going to solve their problem. You still have to show up from a place of integrity, which I suspect that all of your listeners already are committed to doing that, right? This is what would attract them to listen to you and follow you. So they're already not going to recommend something that's out of reach or out of scope or out of integrity, frankly. But when you say to somebody, based on what you've shared, there are 3 ways that we could work together. We could, and you're going to start at the top. You're going to say, we could do the full package, the full project. It's going to get you everything that you want. And the pricing for that is this. We could also kind of start in the middle where we could get most of the things you want, see how it's going, and then, whatever, and the price, and now this is a smaller price, and you go, or if you're just wanting the basic package just to get that first piece, done for you, then it's this price. So you always start top down. And the reason you do that is the way our brains work. As humans, we come out of the womb already knowing how to grasp. Like babies already know how to grasp things, right? Like you ever hold a baby and they get a hold of your hair, like, they already, like, nobody had to teach them how to pull hair. Like they know how to grasp. So as humans, we like to attach to things. So when you start at the top and you work your way down, it's easier for people to make a decision that is a better decision for them, because they don't like to give up things in order to get what they want. But on the flip side of this, the reason you don't start at the bottom and work your way up is because we don't like to pay more to get what we need.
Yeah. I'm going to say that again. We don't want to pay more to get what we need. So that's why we start from the top and work our way down.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, because usually what I heard is, sales coaches would say, oh, mention your price, and then just like probably the highest price, and then just stop talking and see what the reaction is. Where you are saying, no, give all the options starting from the top and then have a conversation around it. Is that correct?
Well, almost. I'm going to say almost. I'm going to, if I can, just clarify a little bit around that. So I'm totally fine if I have a conversation with you, you tell me what you need, and I have a specific program that is going to meet your needs. I'm happy to say, based on what you've shared, the program that is going to meet the things that you've talked about, it's going to get you this, this, and this. And here's what's involved in the program, and here's the pricing for it. It's $10,000. Now, if you clutch your pearls and go like, oh my gosh, $10,000, Nikki, whoo, that's a little rich for my blood, right? I might have missed the mark a little bit there with you. So sometimes based on what people have shared, there are a couple different ways where, a couple ways for them to get it. So if you're going to lay out more than one option for somebody, don't ever give them more than 3 initially to make a decision with. And when you do that, if you're going to say, there's a couple ways that like just a basic question. So just to give you a real life example, if somebody said to me, Nikki, what are the ways that you work with clients? I have a lot of ways that I work with clients, but I'm never going to answer that question with more than 3 answers. So I'm going to say, I have private coaching clients, I have classes that I offer, and then I have a group coaching program. Of those 3, which are you most interested in hearing more about? Now, I haven't actually listed pricing, but if they say, well, what are the 3 ways, or what are the ways you work with clients and what's the pricing? I could say, I have private coaching, it ranges from this to this. I have classes, they typically are priced at this. I have a group coaching program and it's a monthly, payment, and it's this. Of those 3, which are you most interested in hearing more about? Because if I try to tell somebody all the ways I work with them, I will overwhelm them. And an overwhelmed mind is not going to buy. They're not going to make a decision. So I have to be the expert. I have to be the person that will stand in my place of authority and recommend, because I've asked you the right questions, what's the right solution for you.
Right. So to come back to my question about, do you state all 3 or just the one and then wait for an answer? I guess it depends whether they have a very specific request and, you basically already talked about something that is very fitting for their needs, then you would just offer that. And then maybe from there, if they're like, oh, that's a little bit high, is there anything else we could do? Then you could offer your group coaching, for example. So
Exactly.
it's really just kind of going with the flow. That's how I've always done it. And it feels good to be able to offer different solutions depending on the budget that people have, and then say, well, maybe we can do this. And sometimes I even come up with new offers and say, well, I really want to help you because you're, doing such good work for a cause that really is important to me. And then, I'll come up with a new offer or add them to a program, as well as my one-on-one coaching, things like that. I think one thing that I learned with pricing and selling is like we are taking ourselves often too seriously. Like we think we have to be this, rigid kind of business owners. And it's like, well, actually, you can still make money and just be a bit more in the flow. I don't know what you think about that, Nikki.
I agree with you 100%. I think, if I could just comment on what I'm hearing you say, and you please correct me if this is not in alignment, is that the sales conversation is a conversation.
Right.
And so it has this back and forth flow.
Right.
You shouldn't just be talking at people the whole time.
Yeah.
And so you should talk with, and the way to talk with people oftentimes is to ask questions. So if you lay out an offer and somebody's like, oh, that's a little bit more than what I was expecting, then my next thing I'm going to say to you isn't to shame you or try to push you into it. I'm going to follow up and say, well, what were you expecting?
Right.
Like, it's a conversation. And then you come back at me and I say, well, I do have maybe a way we could get started together. And I do think depending on the size of your business and who's doing the selling in your business, if you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur, like there is something about being a little nimble, I always say my all-time favorite quote is, blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape.
Mm.
And the idea in your sales conversation is to have some flexibility. If you identify the person I'm talking to right now is an ideal client, they definitely have a need, and I feel compelled to want to serve them in some way. I wouldn't develop a new product offering for every single conversation, because then you're going to probably burn yourself out, frankly, in your business. But sometimes you can add a little tweak here and there. Every once in a while, somebody, like I just had somebody yesterday, I put out an offer on a training and somebody followed up with me and said, Nikki, I really want to do this with you, but I can't start it, until after the first of the year. And I said, well, I'm happy to wait. Like I didn't tell anybody else that, but this is what this person needs. And so I'll do that for that person because I have the ability to make that decision in my business.
Yeah, that so resonates. We also talked about humane payment plans in the community recently, and that's another thing that we feel strongly about. It's kind of this integrity piece where if we are safe ourselves, right? If we have enough to pay our bills, and yet someone is struggling a little bit and can't make the whole payment, then why would we make payment plans that are non-humane, where it's like, oh, now you have to pay 20% more just because you can't make the one full-time payment? And so we were just discussing, how can we make it a win-win situation where it's like, yeah, I really want you to have this program or coaching or whatever it is. And yet, there needs to be a huge trust. And that trust I now see is established already before, right? Obviously through your marketing, that's what humane marketing is all about. But even through the pricing, like having these prices on your website, that also creates trust, because it's like, well, it's all up there, it's all understood and clear. And yeah, I think there's a lot of integrity to that. Yeah, just curious what you think about payment plans and if you have any thoughts on that.
I love the idea of payment plans as long as it's still, like you said, it's not hurting your business, from a cash flow standpoint. It's not causing you to not be able to pay your vendors or pay your team or something like that. Then I think there's nothing wrong with a payment plan. As a matter of fact, I love payment plans. And even the program that I mentioned yesterday that I offered, when you go to the page to sign up, right underneath there's an option for a payment plan. Sometimes I promote payment plans heavily in and I'm marketing an offer. Sometimes I don't. I just put them, subtly on the page for somebody, because if they've clicked with an interest and they've shown some interest by clicking on the page and wanting to learn more about whatever the offer is, and if there's some part of them that's like, dang, I'd really like to do this, but I don't have this, I don't have that much money right now available to spend on, coaching with Nikki or whatever, they see like, oh, there's a payment plan there. And for me, it's fine. Like I'm happy to do that. I will say, just to comment on payment plans, one thing that I think sometimes can be a limiting belief around payment plans for entrepreneurs, for business owners, is they think that the payment plan has to be the same amount over a certain period of time. So for instance, I'm going to do a payment plan. That means I've got to break it up into, it's a 3-month program. So it has to be 3 of the exact same payments. And that to me isn't always the case. Sometimes if a lot of the work, the heavy lifting is done in that first, part of working together, I often will give people the option of paying 50% upfront, because I know that the majority of the work that I'm doing, the really heavy lifting and the stuff that costs my business the money, to, pay for whatever the extras are, the stuff that comes, like I need to be able to cover those costs. But then what I'll do is then I will split up the other 50% over the next 2 months or whatever. So make sure that you're giving yourself a little bit of flexibility in your payment plans too. You don't want to make it confusing or crazy, but I just had a client where I was coaching her around this, and she was like, it's so hard for me to do a payment plan because of all the costs involved in that first month. And I was like, well, what if we collected 50%? And she was like, would people do that? And I was like, people do it with me all the time. Let's try it. And then she came back and she's like, they were so happy to do it that way. And I was like, yeah, again, blessed are the flexible. You don't have to be bent out of shape. Be willing to do things that work for your business, but also make it easy for people to say yes to hiring you.
That's a good reminder, because again, the humane approach is not just serving your clients, it's also serving yourself. And so it really is important that you don't get into trouble because you're, making everything possible for them, where then you are struggling in the back. So it's really just, having the conversation and saying, look, I'd love to offer you this, but this is what I need, right? And then have this conversation. And I think it really comes with this trust building that is so important. And I think that's also where you just said, you wouldn't have offered to wait to just anybody who asked, but this person, that's what they needed. And so you're like, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So in a way, it's like, well, just because you have a standard program or a standard fee doesn't mean you have to exactly do the same thing for everybody, because especially, in the service business, we're in the human business. And so we should be talking to people about these things. We shouldn't just say, this is, how it is, and that's it. And yet so often that's what we're taught in sales. It's like, no, you come up with your price and that's how it is. And, no flexibility at all. So
Yeah.
appreciate your input here.
Yeah. Is it okay if I just add like one little piece to this idea of payment
Yeah,
plan in the conversation of the sale?
right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is important also to remember is, so if you're having a conversation with a prospective client and you talk about the offer and they say, oh my gosh, that sounds perfect for me, but really, I just don't have the funds right now to do that. One of the cautions that I would say is, don't default to the payment plan conversation. Check to see if the payment plan conversation is appropriate. So I always look at things of like asking permission. So instead of, somebody pushes back on price, if you go right into the payment plan option without getting their permission to talk about it, it can come off a little salesy and aggressive.
Yeah.
So when somebody pushes back to me on price, I will usually say, now, if I was able to offer you a payment plan, would that be something you'd be interested in considering? And would that make it more feasible for you?
Right.
So I don't go into the payment plan, because if they say, no, Nikki, even with a payment plan, I just couldn't do it, then I'm going to respect that and I'm going to pull back. But if you go right into payment plan, again, it sounds like you're kind of ignoring what they said to you, that they can't afford it. But
I'm so
oftentimes
glad you
when
brought that up. Yeah, that's so important, because
good.
we're not trying to push the payment plan
No.
on somebody, right? Because it's like this, phrase, no is an answer. And
Yeah.
it's really, that's what it is. It's like, if they just don't want to or can't, then we should respect that. And a payment plan is not going to solve that. That's so true. It's a very different energy when they asked for the payment plan, whether when we kind of, bring on the topic and and actually want to kind of push them towards the payment plan. I totally agree. I don't think I ever bring it up. I would probably rather go, offer another solution like the group coaching or something like that. And then maybe they would come back and say, actually, do you offer a payment plan? So, because I think they're quite known now. And so sometimes people, often people ask me about the payment plans. So
Yeah.
that's a good distinction. Thanks so much for bringing that in.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me.
Anything else you want to share about prices and payments and selling conversations? We shared a lot of things, but anything else that comes to mind?
Well, one of the things that I want to maybe just touch on, in case this is helpful for your audience, is there's a difference between being pushy and aggressive in a sales conversation versus making it easy for somebody to make a decision. So I find that a lot of times when people are uncomfortable with sales, they're hesitant to ask somebody to move forward or invite them to take that next step with them. And I want to just say, in a really loving, kind way, that that's your stuff and you need to set it aside. That's your mindset stuff, because your job is to make it really easy for people to make decisions. Doesn't mean the decision's always going to go in your favor, but you still want to make sure that if you are talking to somebody and they've got a need and they've expressed interest in some way, please, please, please make sure that you ask them for their business so that they can decide in the moment whether or not it's the right next step for them. But if you don't ask them, don't assume that they'll decide, because our brains are lazy and we have decision fatigue and we're overwhelmed. And so if you don't make it easy for somebody, a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I'm just going to think about it. But then they actually never think about it because they have too many other things to think about. And then they don't ever get the solution to the problem or the need that they have. So make sure you always follow up in the appropriate time in a conversation, and go ahead and ask for the sale, ask for the business, and then be quiet and let them say one way or the other.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. One thing that also just I remembered is a question that I always ask about expectations, because you mentioned integrity a few times, and and just earlier before our call, I had another email or LinkedIn message from someone who bought a big package and was disillusioned because of, promises that were not kept. And so I think it's really important, that piece of expectations, to ask in a gentle sales conversation, well, what's your expectations for our work together? To really understand what they're expecting and what you can actually in full integrity deliver. Because that, again, it helps you understand where they are and what their actual beliefs are. And it also helps this trust building again. And then it's just kind of like, it's setting the stage for a beautiful collaboration. Then not addressing it and the person thinking, oh, I'm going to get, 20 new clients from this. And you, meanwhile, not thinking that at all, right? You're like, no, this is, I can't promise that. So just putting it out into the open and having a conversation about that is really important, I think.
I love that you said that and commented on that. It's, you never want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Right.
But at the same time, if you don't understand what your client has in their mind because they haven't been given the opportunity to articulate it, you may inadvertently leave them feeling like you overpromised and underdelivered. And how disappointing not only is that to them, but also for you. And it starts to get in your head and you start to think, well, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, or maybe my offer isn't the right offer. And like all of that negative mindset could have been avoided doing exactly what you just said, Sarah. I love that so much.
It's been wonderful. Thanks so much for being here and doing such good work, Nikki. Please do tell us where people can find you. And I believe you have an offer for us as well.
I do. Thank you so much for having me. I always like to give a gift when I get to come and be with somebody and spend some time in front of their audience. So I have a course. It's a really short little training, and it talks about the 5 steps to a sales conversation. That's my signature framework. It's called Mastering the Sales Conversation, and it will give you the 5 steps and what to say or do in those 5 steps. It's not script. It's teaching you how to show up and be your authentic, genuine self in those conversations. So you can get that by going to yoursalesmaven.com/humane. And that'll be there for you. It's free. You can download it. And once you do that, then we'll be connected.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Which social platform are you usually most active on, Nikki?
I tend to be the most active on LinkedIn and Instagram, but I also have a podcast too called Sales Maven. So since these are your listeners, if they are looking for another podcast to check out, I would encourage them to check out the Sales Maven podcast.
Wonderful. Yeah. And as you know, I always have a last question, and that is, what are you grateful for today or this week?
You know what I'm most grateful for today is that the weather here where I live in Boise, Idaho is starting to shift, and I'm so excited for fall. And we're starting to let go of some of this really hot days. So I'm so grateful for the change in the season.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. It's like over here, it's like an Indian summer. It's still warm, but definitely crisp in the morning and at night. So that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for hanging out, Nikki.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for watching and being part of a generation of marketers who cares for yourself, for your clients, and for the planet. We really are change makers before we are marketers. So go ahead, be the change you want to see in the world. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.